He gave too much. But no one called it a problem. They called it being a good man. They praised his patience, clapped for his consistency, applauded his willingness to stay, even when everything inside him was falling apart. He didn't complain, didn't withdraw, didn't explode. He just disappeared, piece by piece, smile by smile, until one day he looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the man looking back. Part 1. The man who gave too much. He wasn't needy. He was loyal. He didn't ask for more. He gave more than anyone ever asked for. He showed up not once, but always. Not just on good days, but on the hard ones too. He remembered birthdays, checked in after a long day, brought flowers not for apologies, but for ordinary Thursdays, to her, to his friends, to co-workers, even to family who hadn't truly seen him in years. He didn't see himself as a martyr. He simply believed, if I love well enough, I'll be loved deeply in return. But here's truth number 1. Loyalty, when unbalanced, becomes a cage. You start performing to stay relevant. You stop questioning what you truly need, because you're too focused on meeting everyone else's. And truth number 2. Effort, when unreciprocated, becomes self-erasure. They see your giving, but they stop seeing you. At first, it felt warm, needed, valued. But then, the thank yous stopped. The eyes stopped lighting up. The hugs became half-hearted. The conversations became one-sided. What was once appreciated became expected. The more consistent he was, the more invisible he became. He didn't change. He didn't falter. But something in their eyes did. And the worst part? No one asked if he was tired. No one asked what he needed. No one asked, "Are you okay?" Because in this world, the man who gives the most is often the last one people think to check on. Part 2. The breakdown that left no evidence. He didn't break by shouting. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't throw things. Didn't leave angry voicemails. He broke in absolute silence. Not in one moment, but in 100 small ones. So quiet, so unremarkable no one noticed. He stopped sending good morning texts. They chalked it up to forgetfulness. He stopped planning Friday nights. They assumed he was just busy. Oh. He stopped asking, "Are you free this weekend?" Because the answer had always been, "Not this time." He started eating alone, not because no one invited him, but because he was done extending invitations to people who only showed up when it was convenient for them. And still, no one asked where he went. No one followed up. No one knocked on his silence. He became a ghost in his own life, present but unacknowledged, helpful but unseen, loyal but lonely. That's when he faced a truth most men carry in silence. He was never truly loved for who he was. He was only valued for what he gave. And once he stopped performing, stopped serving, fixing, initiating, showing up, he stopped mattering. The calls stopped. The attention vanished. The warmth dissolved. But the pain stayed. Because now, it had a name. He wasn't heartbroken. He wasn't rejected. He was simply no longer needed. And in a world where your worth is tied to usefulness, the moment you stop giving is the moment they forget you were ever there. Part 3. The turning point. The shift didn't happen during an argument. There was no outburst, no dramatic goodbye, no final message left unread. It happened one quiet Sunday. He woke up early, like he always did. But this time, he didn't feel like making breakfast for 2. He looked at his phone. Dozens of names, none of them felt like someone who'd listen. If he texted, "I'm not okay," and for the first time, he didn't feel guilty about going silent. He felt relieved. He didn't announce his withdrawal. He didn't unfollow or block. He just stopped offering what was never truly valued. One by one, he canceled dinner plans, the ones he always initiated. He let messages sit, without the urgency to respond. He said no to favors that were always assumed, never asked for with care. And the world? It didn't fall apart. It didn't chase him. It didn't wonder why he stepped back. That hurt. But it also healed. Because that silence, that total lack of follow-up, told him everything he needed to know. He was never essential. He was simply available. And the day a man realizes that is the day he stops waiting to be seen and starts seeing himself. He didn't leave out of pride. He left out of protection. because staying meant slowly fading and disappearing while still being alive is the most dangerous kind of death. So he walked away, not to punish anyone, but to rescue the last pieces of himself that still remembered what it felt like to matter. Part 4. The rebuilding begins in stillness. There was no big transformation, no plane ticket to Bali, no sudden six-pack, no self-help book that changed everything. He didn't need a new life. He needed to feel alive in his own. So he started with silence. He stopped filling every moment with noise. No television in the background. No podcast during meals. No endless scrolling to numb the ache. He let the quiet speak. And what it said was hard to hear. You've been exhausted, not just tired. You've been performing, not connecting. You've been surviving, not living. At first, solitude felt like punishment. Mornings were heavy. Evenings, longer. The couch felt colder than ever. The phone buzzed less and sometimes not at all. But in that quiet, he started remembering who he was. Before he became everyone else's solution, he picked up old books. He took long walks not to escape, but to breathe, to arrive. He started cooking not fast meals, but slow, intentional ones. He played music not to impress, but to feel. He no longer needed to be on. He just needed to be. And slowly, almost sacredly, that stillness became strength. That emptiness turned into space. That ache became alignment. He stopped asking, "Who will show up for me?" and started asking, "What version of me do I want to show up as?" Even when no one is watching. And when you rebuild from that place, you're no longer performing to be loved. You're simply becoming someone you refuse to abandon again. Part 5. The new code he lives by. He doesn't say much these days, but if you listened closely, you'd notice he's living by a different code now. A quiet, powerful code that no one taught him, because it was born from what broke him. He no longer rushes to reply, not because he's rude, but because urgency is no longer a survival skill. He no longer says yes, just to be polite. Because pleasing others at the cost of betraying himself, that's a currency he's done spending. The man he is today, he's not louder. He's clearer. He moves more slowly, but with direction. He doesn't argue, not because he's weak, but proving himself is no longer part of his worth. He learned to read patterns, not words. He pays attention to energy, not apologies. And when someone crosses his boundary, he doesn't explode. He simply disappears. If it drains me, I walk away. If it confuses me, I pause. If it feels like I have to earn it, I leave it. He no longer seeks validation in group chats. He no longer performs for claps. He's not chasing love. He's protecting peace. He's not trying to be understood anymore. He's trying to be aligned. That's the new code. And the few who still remain in his circle, they know. This man doesn't give endless chances. He gives clarity. Once. Not out of bitterness, but because he knows what it took to rebuild this version of himself. He's no longer accessible by default. He's accessible by discernment. Because the man who once gave too much now guards his time, his space, and most of all, his soul. Part 6. Why the world fears men like him. They don't talk about him much, but when they do, they whisper. Something changed in him. He used to be so available. I don't know what happened, he just pulled away. They'll say he became distant, that he's too quiet now, that he's not the same. And in a way they're right. He isn't. Because once a man has felt what it's like to be emptied, to give without return, to break quietly in the corner of a room full of people who never noticed, he doesn't return the same. Volves. The world fears men like him, not because they're dangerous, but because they can't be controlled. You can't guilt him. You can't manipulate him with silence. You can't bait him with promises. Because he's stopped looking outward for what he now builds inward. He used to explain himself. Now he lets his absence speak. He used to apologize for his boundaries. Now he lets the door close. Softly, without drama, without warning, without return. They fear him because he no longer plays by the rules they used to bend against him, because he no longer needs attention to feel seen, because he no longer waits for love to permit him to feel whole. He has become what most people are not prepared for, a man who knows peace and will not trade it for access, affection, or approval. And that kind of man, he's untouchable. Not because he built walls, but because he finally built a home inside himself that no one else has the keys to. Part 7. His peace is not lonely. They ask him sometimes, with a mix of concern and quiet judgment, "Don't you get lonely?" And he doesn't flinch, doesn't rush to defend himself. He just smiles, not wide, but steady, not sarcastic but settled, because what they call loneliness, he calls peace. They see an empty apartment. He sees clarity. They see quiet mornings. He feels calm. They see the absence of people. He feels the presence of himself, finally, fully. He's not avoiding connection. He's avoiding self-abandonment. He used to fear silence, because in silence, he had to confront everything he ignored, the resentment, the exhaustion, the hunger to be loved without having to perform. But now, silence has become his sanctuary. He doesn't need someone to fill the room. He needs truth to fill his soul. He still loves deeply, but slowly. He still believes in connection, but only the kind that doesn't cost him his clarity. He learned that loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of meaning even when people are near. And peace is presence with yourself, even when no one else is around. So when they ask, "Aren't you afraid you'll grow old alone?" he simply replies, I'm afraid of growing old, having never met myself." Part 8. The man who won't be lost again. He doesn't walk with arrogance. He walks with memory. Memory of what it took to come back to himself. After years of performing, giving, fading, he still believes in love. Yes, but he no longer needs it to feel complete. If she comes, she must come with softness, with stillness, with respect for the silence he fought to reclaim. She must understand. He doesn't want to be saved. He doesn't want to be impressed. He wants to be seen and left whole. And if she doesn't come, that's okay too, because he no longer feels less than when he's alone. He feels preserved. He feels anchored. He feels his own. He won't lower his standards, because he knows how expensive it is to lose yourself for someone who never truly valued the cost. This man, he's not bitter, he's built. He's not afraid to try again, he's just unwilling to shrink again. He doesn't crave attention, he honors intention. So when someone asks him, "Are you still open to love?" he says, "Yes, but only if I can love her without losing me." Because the man who once disappeared in everyone else's story has finally written one of his own. And this time, he's the main character, the author, and the protector of every boundary that keeps him whole. He may walk alone, but he will never be lost again. So if you see him at the cafe, sipping his coffee alone, reading slowly, looking unbothered by the noise of the world, don't mistake that quiet for sadness. Don't confuse solitude with bitterness. That man, he's not lonely. He's calibrated. He's not cold. He's clear. And when he walks away from chaos, he doesn't slam the door. He just closes it, softly. Because the man who has been broken before no longer argues to be understood. He simply builds a life so whole, he no longer needs to explain why he protects it.